What's going on, my creatures of the night? Figured I'd have some fun today. This is guess you can say, my top 10 bands or artists that are not in the metal catalog. Sort of like a guilty pleasure thing, I guess. I just didn't want to label it as that. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into things here. Number 10 is Wu-Tang Clan. Now, I haven't really listened to much hip hop out there. It's never been something that I got heavily into, but I did. One of the very few hip hop albums I have heard is Wu-Tang Clan's album Enter the 36 Chambers, and it wasn't your typical or stereotypical hip hop. It was hard, heavy. It was really raw too. This was the way hip hop should be, in my opinion, and really, in my opinion, it's the only hip hop I could ever really enjoy. Number 9 is Little Richard. Little Richard is classic rock and roll, I believe. He was just one of the first guys to have that hard, heavy voice incorporated with that 50s, 60s style rock and roll. I've just always been a fan of Little Richard's music. You gotta love some old rock and roll. In fact, Little Richard is one of Lemmy's biggest influences, believe it or not. So if it weren't for him, there possibly wouldn't be Motorhead. Number 8 is Yanni. I know you wouldn't think a guy like me enjoys Yanni, but Yanni goes for that ambient / new age meditative sound with a bit more of an upbeat approach. I've always enjoyed his music. It's the kind of music that gets you in a good mood. It's something you can simply just sit down and relax to. He's quite talented. He's quite the talented musician. I've always admired, being a keyboard player, I've always admired his skills on the keyboard. Number 7 is the Bee Gees. I was never heavily into disco, but the Bee Gees were more than your typical disco band. They had that disco groove, but at the same time were able to put real depth and meaning behind their music, which I really enjoy. Not to mention, they have written songs that most people hear growing up and most people enjoy. But they are a band that I really like, believe it or not. Number 6 is the Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead was psychedelic, man. They were the pure definition of psychedelic. They defined the psychedelic movement in the 60s. Their live performances are really what made them phenomenal, though. The music is just majestic, man. I've always enjoyed it. You've got like 20-minute long solos and stuff, which, is pretty much my gateway into Dream Theater. Number 5 is Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye's music really speaks to the soul, and I have a small interest in that old school Motown stuff, believe it or not. It's got pure meaning, it's something you really feel when you listen to, It's Marvin Gaye is able to deliver a message that speaks to you deeply. It's great music. Number 4 is The Cure. I've always been a huge fan of that 80s dark wave, new wave, goth stuff. It's heavy, but it's electronically influenced, which really takes you to the dark side of the 80s. Believe it or not, when I was 12 or 13, I did go through a little bit of a goth phase. Never really fully left that. Obviously I don't wear trip pants anymore, but yeah, introduced me to some really good musics, which leads me to number 3. New Order, which is also another one of those dark wave, new wave bands from the 80s that really expanded their ability with the synthesizers, and they created such a unique sound like no other. I totally dig it, man. It's great. Number 2 would have to be Tears for Fears. Tears for Fears is emotionally driven with tons of influences, such as rock, new wave, various multicultural influences, and that power ballad feel. They're a band that I've always loved. They use political lyrics. They can make love songs. They can trigger any emotion inside of you. It can trigger anger, sadness, even happiness. Believe it or not, they're great. And number 1 is Depeche Mode. Depeche Mode is undescribable. They really take you to that dark side with that really deep and dark meaning behind their music, much like the other few bands I mentioned. But they've also experimented a lot and gotten away with it. They're amazing. They went from this 80s, poppy kind of synthesizer band all the way up until the 90s, where they started they started using grunge and rock and roll influences in the mix, which created an amazing sound. I can't really come up with a specific genre for Depeche Mode because they are quite unique. They have mixed so many different genres together, and Depeche Mode is not the kind of thing that you boast about being a fan of. It's something that you kind of just sit down and quietly listen to, or something that you sit there and enjoy. And Depeche Mode does have its own fan base, believe it or not, but they don't really. They're not an annoying fan base. But yeah, that's really all I got for non. I'm mostly into the rock. Well, I mentioned a couple rock bands here, but I'm mostly into the metal and the hard rock. So these are there's a very few bands that I like that are outside of that rock and metal feel. And but yeah, people always look at me and they assume that just because I'm a metalhead, I have no open mind and that I'm an elitist and that I don't like anything else. But that's simply not true. Metalheads are probably the most open-minded people I've met, believe it or not. Sorry if my voice is a little off. I'm kind of sick. I got a bit of a sore throat. But yeah, thank you guys for watching and rock on.